C-SPAN and get you, as promised, a few minutes late out to New Jersey for that 11th Congressional District debate.
Being unique among industrial nations for those high costs, all while there's a rise in infant mortality and a drop in life expectancy. And also the U.S., one of the few that has a private for-profit insurance model. His question for the candidates: how do you propose fixing this system to bring U.S. healthcare more in line with the rest of the world?
And this goes to Mr. Weber first.
There's a few things we can do and we should do immediately, and that is to allow people to buy health insurance across state lines. It would immediately lower health insurance costs for New Jerseyans. They could buy policies that fit their family's needs and their family's budgets. We should aggressively attack chronic illnesses, treat them and prevent them. 75% of our healthcare spend in this country can be attributed to chronic illnesses like asthma and diabetes and their later onsets. We should protect our doctors from jackpot lawsuit verdicts. Tort reform could help doctors order fewer tests and practice less defensive medicine. The one thing we shouldn't do is to do something that Mikie Sherrill is wide open to, and that is a Medicare for All plan that would not only blow up Medicare, but cost our country $32 trillion over the next 10 years. A socialized medicine scheme is not the direction we should go, and that Mikie can't reject that out of hand is a problem for Mikie.
Ms. Sherrill, you have 60 seconds to address John Mooney's question. Certainly,
I'll address that. Assemblyman Weber knows, though, that I have rejected out of hand the Medicare for All plan that we've seen that costs $32 trillion. I have said time and again that I'm against raising taxes on the New Jersey taxpayer and that I won't support a plan that's going to do just that. But the fact of the matter is we do need to improve our health care and we do need to get costs down. And what's striking about some of the proposals that Assemblyman Weber has talked about, including the preventative measures that are included in the Affordable Care Act, is that they are included in the Affordable Care Act. There is prevention included in that act. And so if we had bipartisan reform, if we had both sides working together to get better health care for this nation, I think we could really do that. We could look at things like allowing people 55 and older to buy into Medicare. We could look at things like having Medicare and Medicaid negotiate for drug prices to bring drug costs down. And yet when we constantly fight, and as we've seen the Republicans put forth 70 repeal bills with no replacement included in those repeal bills, that's not the type of new leadership and bipartisanship we need to see in Congress.
Let's ask Mr. Weber what you think of extending Medicare down to the age of 55 that Ms. Sherrill just proposed.
I'd be very reluctant to do that, Michael. We have a problem with Medicare in that we're worried about funding the program's obligations as it stands today. And so expanding it does not sound like a solution to the problem. It sounds like making the problem bigger. We have to protect Medicare for the people who are relying on it, not expand a program, blow it up, and if it becomes too large, it's not going to serve the population that it's intended to serve.
And what do you think of his proposal to allow insurance companies to sell policies across state lines and the promotion of tort reform for medical malpractice insurance?
So we can look at selling insurance policies across state lines. In fact, that's critical to some of our states in the nation, especially for competition and to get costs down. But we need to do that with federally, because right now, for example, the insurance markets in New Jersey cover certain people that bring costs down that say the insurance markets in Pennsylvania don't. So by going across state lines, we would have a different risk pool, and that could actually bring costs up because we would be insuring seniors and older people and not get the younger people in like Pennsylvania's insurance pool. So that's why we need federal regulation and bipartisan discussions on how to move forward.
Mr. Weber, Ms. Sherrill, in her campaign literature, says that you would strip coverage of pre-existing conditions. What's your view on that?
It's simply not true, and it's entirely baseless. It's not the first time that the Sherrill campaign has blatantly lied about my positions. We can do all of the reforms that I was talking about and provide protections for people with pre-existing conditions. We have to. It's a major concern when people put their head on the pillow at night. Are they going to lose their health insurance? Do they have conditions that are going to prevent them from getting the care they need? I would absolutely support keeping and expanding protections for people with pre-existing conditions.
So, Ms. Sherrill, you have 30 seconds. Do you want to withdraw the charge that he would
Well, I'm glad to hear he wants to keep the pre-existing conditions. That was part of the Affordable Care Act and something that I think many people throughout the district want to keep. Originally, he in the past wanted to repeal the Affordable Care Act, which would have stripped coverage from people with pre-existing conditions.
All right. Let's move on. This question goes to Ms. Sherrill. Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid consume 49% of the federal budget. All are under strain to stay solvent. How will you ensure their solvency?
I think that's a great question and something that I think a lot of us have been very concerned about, because after this recent tax plan, which was paid for, by the way, on the backs of the New Jersey taxpayer with the state and local tax deduction and by exploding our deficit, Speaker Paul Ryan said now he was going to make cuts to Social Security and Medicare. And that's something that I am adamantly opposed to. I don't believe in any cuts. I don't believe in privatizing it. As far as how we want to move forward with that, it is solvent now. We want to make sure it's solvent into the future. This is something that people have paid into for their entire career. And when we look at the history of it, we know that before 1935, before we had Social Security, over half of the seniors were living below the poverty line. So it's a safety net that we have to keep, and we have to look at tax reform that's going to make sure it's solvent well into the future, not a tax reform that simply blows up the deficit and then decides to make cuts to Social Security and Medicare.
Mr. Weber, you get a 30-second rebuttal.
There's a big subject to cover in 30 seconds, Michael. We'll try. Mikie either doesn't understand the program or continually talks out of both sides of her mouth, because you can't be both for Obamacare and say, I don't want to cut Medicare. Obamacare took $800 billion out of Medicare to fund its subsidies. You can't say you're going to protect Medicare and then say, I like Obamacare. We need to protect Social Security. We need to protect Medicare for the people who are relying on it. We need to reform Medicaid to get people off of government assistance and into the private sector. That's what the tax cut did earlier this year. It reduced Medicaid rolls by $1.5 million. That's a good thing we should be celebrating, not something we should be wringing our hands over.
Another entitlements question, this one to Mr. Weber. The population is aging. That puts a strain on Social Security. Some have proposed gradually raising the retirement age by 1 month per year. Chris Christie made that a centerpiece of his campaign for a presidential nomination. Would you support slowly raising the retirement age?
Michael, I support balancing the federal budget, and we have to do that in a context of a growing economy and common sense tax policy. A growing economy will help protect our Social Security recipients. A growing economy will help protect our Medicare recipients. Any reforms that we might consider to our entitlements have to be done in a context of an economy that can afford it and sustain it. And so that's my goal when I go down to Washington, not to cut Social Security, but rather to grow our economy so that we can sustain the programs that people have been counting on.
So you would not raise the retirement age slowly, one month a year?
No.
Ms. Sherrill, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
No, I would not raise the retirement age slowly. And speaking of not understanding a system, I think it's striking that Assemblyman Weber says he's not for deficits and yet is for this tax plan that just has increased our deficit exponentially. And now, and pretty soon, we will be paying more in interest on this deficit than we will be paying for defense spending.
I would like to go back to that and ask you, Mr. Weber, the Congressional Budget Office says that under this current tax plan, our $21 trillion debt will balloon to $33 trillion in 10 years. Is that acceptable?
I don't think it's accurate. The CBO had estimates when the tax package was passed. The federal government has exceeded revenue expectations every month since the tax package went into effect. We are seeing a windfall of revenues that is drastically reducing and changing the assumptions that the CBO made. Not only that, we're spending less because fewer people are receiving Medicaid, fewer people are receiving food stamps because our economy is growing. Is the debt a problem? Absolutely it is. Should we eliminate the deficit? We should. But doing it in the context of a robust economy and a growing economy that provides opportunity for all Americans, that's the right time to have the discussion. Not going back to the Obama-era ways of spending ourselves into deficits and having a stagnant economy.
Do you want to rebuttal?
So as people recall, when President Obama came into office, we were facing a recession, and luckily it didn't turn into a depression. And that's the time you sometimes spend in an economy to ensure that it doesn't get worse. Of course, now, when we do have a growing and robust economy, is generally not the time that you explode your deficit. So I was opposed to this huge expansion of our deficit, and I don't think it's going to be good for our economy, and it's certainly not fair to place that on the backs of our children.
All right, we're going to move on to student debt. The question comes from our business correspondent, Rhonda Schaffler, who prepared this background report on the issue.
Student loan debt has reached $1.5 trillion, according to the U.S. Federal Reserve. Total outstanding student debt has doubled in less than 10 years. That's the highest category of consumer debt after mortgages. In New Jersey, the average student graduates with more than $32,000 in debt, the sixth highest debt level among the 50 states. And all that debt poses a risk to the economy, according to the head of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell.
And as student loan continues to grow and becomes larger and larger, then it absolutely could hold back growth.
Some students simply cannot make their payments, and default rates on student debt are much higher than default rates on other types of consumer debt. According to the Department of Education's most recently available data, the current student loan default rate is 10.8%. New Jersey's default rate is lower at 9.7%. But critics point out the department only looks at defaults in a 3-year period and doesn't fully capture the financial distress. In fact, the Federal Reserve states delinquency rates could be twice as high.
We have a question now for both candidates, starting with Ms. Sherrill. What can be done to stop this trend of rising student loan debt?
This trend is really harming a lot of our young people. It's making them unable to purchase houses, making them unable to get married and start a family of their own because of this huge burden of debt that they have. In fact, someone on my staff has an interest rate of 7% for her debt, her college debt. So we should allow students to negotiate with the banks to bring their debt down as far as the interest rates, like you do for a home loan. We also need to look at how we're spending money. The United States spends a lot of money on our colleges and universities, and some of that goes to the GI Bill, where our veterans many times go to for-profit schools. In fact, if you go outside many of our bases, you'll see a lot of for-profit colleges who, and they know that they can have predatory loans, quite frankly, on our soldiers and sailors, and then they never get a degree, and they owe this huge amount of debt. We also have seen that sometimes we're not moving students into the correct fields. So sometimes a 2-year college degree will help our students get into jobs in the near term, whereas sometimes these 4-year degrees don't get them work and they owe a huge amount of debt.
Mr. Weber, your thoughts on student loan debt?
I have a lot of thoughts on them. I got 7 kids going to college someday soon, so I'm concerned about it. I think there's 3 things that we can do primarily. Look at this. First of all, we've got to hold our colleges and universities accountable. We see in Indiana, Purdue University holding its tuition flat for 4 years in a row. Rutgers should be required to do the same thing. Second, we should try different ways to finance our college educations. I've been a leader in the state assembly talking about innovative ways to provide college education and finance college education for our students. Why don't we allow students to sell equity in their future careers instead of always taking on debt? In other words, have a lender pay for their college education and then have the students pay back a percentage of their income as they go through their careers. But finally, Michael, the best way to lower student debt is to have those 529s explode. A growing economy addresses so many of the problems that we have in this country. Not only would people borrow less if their 529s were larger, but they'd be able to find high-paying jobs when they got out of school. That's what we're seeing in America now. That's what we need to continue to encourage.
Ms. Sherrill, a quick follow. Some are proposing, including Governor Murphy, free community college as a way to attack this problem. Do you support that?
You know, I've been talking a lot about how the tax burden on our New Jersey families is making it really hard to afford the cost of living. And so without understanding how that would be paid for, I haven't supported it because it sounds like it would raise taxes on our families. Right now in my own town, we see a lot of families that are just saying, you know, I can't afford to live here. I might have to move out of state because I can't raise my family here. And that's unacceptable. So no, I haven't been supporting that at this time.
You want a rebuttal? 30 seconds.
It's an area of agreement. I don't support it either. I hope that Mikie lobbied Governor Murphy when he came to support her to tell him he's going the wrong way, like he went the wrong way on taxes, like he's going the wrong way on immigration. I would love to hear Mikie Sherrill speak up more to challenge the leadership in her party.
All right, let's move on. We asked both of you to pose a question to the other. It's time for that, starting with Mr. Weber.
Okay. Mikie, you've campaigned a lot on demanding new leadership in Washington, yet you have as a running mate corrupt Senator Bob Menendez, and you haven't said a word about his all-too-long tenure in Washington. You've campaigned a lot on bipartisanship and asking for more bipartisan leadership in Washington, yet a bipartisan panel of the United States Senate has censured Senator Menendez, said he took gifts illegally and should pay them back. You haven't said a word about that issue either. You tout yourself as a former federal prosecutor, but when federal prosecutors found corroborating evidence of Senator Bob Menendez trafficking in underage prostitutes, you've said nothing about that. And so my question to you this evening is straight and very simple, yes or no. Will you be voting for Bob Menendez for U.S. Senator this year?
Well, thank you for that question. I have been talking about this because, to be clear, ethics are very important to me. It was a huge part of the curriculum at the Naval Academy, a large part of my naval service and my service at the Federal Prosecutor's Office. And so I agree with the Senate Ethics Committee. Senator Menendez needs to pay back that loan. And now our choice is between someone who has been a fighter for New Jersey and somebody who's, quite frankly, made his millions by raising drug prices on cancer patients. So I'm going to go with a fighter for New Jersey because too much is at stake. We need a tax plan that invests in our middle-class families. We need quality and affordable health care for everybody across this country. We have got to get our infrastructure needs funded because our economy cannot move forward without funding the Gateway Tunnel.
Do you want a 30-second rebuttal?
I think that's the problem with Mikie Sherrill. She will associate with anybody to get to the House of Representatives. And if you are associating yourself with Senator Bob Menendez to get to the House of Representatives, there's something very wrong about your campaign.
Do you want a quick comment in reply?
I would just say that this is about the 11th District of New Jersey. I know Assemblyman Weber would like to talk about anything but the issues here and the real issues at stake for the 11th District because he doesn't share the concerns of many people here or the values of most people here. But I can tell you who I associate with. It's generally Navy veterans, former federal prosecutors, the police who've endorsed me, the firefighters who endorsed me, and I'll continue to associate with them as I move forward.
Now it's your turn to ask Mr. Weber a question.
So, Assemblyman Weber, you were part of a group in Harvard Law School that you didn't believe that being gay was a choice, and you felt that through prayer, people could stop being gay. And then you worked very hard for an amendment to our Constitution on several occasions to ban gay marriage. And you refused to vote against conversion therapy for our LGBT youth, despite knowing that it leads to suicides and depressions and drug use. So as a mom, that was very concerning to me. And I just wondered if you could explain your position on conversion therapy for us tonight.
Sure. Mikie gets her facts wrong all the time, and she's wrong again. You know who else was part of that group? Mikie's my wife, Johanna, who's here with me, a group that defended people's religious liberties, and something that I'm very proud of. And of course, I know you, Mikie, support the First Amendment, of course. Michael, in this country, people have the right to be who they want to be, and they have the right to live the way they want to live. Mikie keeps looking backwards 6 years to a bill that even the Star-Ledger, no conservative rag, said should not be voted on, should not be approved, because the relationship and the communication between licensed therapists and patients should be sacrosanct. And the government, no matter what you think about the form of the therapy, the government shouldn't be interfering with the communications between patients and their therapists. And so, of course, I don't agree with anything that would harm or cause trouble for our youth, but to interfere with the relationship between therapists and their patients, well, that's something the Star-Ledger said we shouldn't do, and that's something I didn't think we should do.
You get a 30-second rebuttal.
So knowing that conversion therapy has been debunked and that it's so harmful to our young people, are you opposed to conversion therapy?
I'm opposed to interfering with communication between therapists and their patients. If a licensed therapist wants to provide something and a parent or a family wants to accept that therapy, it's not for the government to say what they can and can't say. This is the perfect example, Michael, of Mikie Sherrill looking back, trying to dredge up old social issues to divide people when I'm talking about kitchen table issues like the economy and taxes and immigration and the things that really impact the lives of the people of North Jersey, not issues that were settled 6 years ago and don't exist in the state of New Jersey.
All right, well, I'm going to give her another 30 seconds just because you sort of accused her of looking backwards. How do you respond?
I did not hear a no, I don't support conversion therapy, which has been debunked and is dangerous for our kids. So I'm concerned.
All right. It's time for another viewer question given to us by John Mooney of NJ Spotlight. John?
Hi, Michael. There's been a lot of interesting questions and conversations online, and our readers and viewers are really posing some really insightful things. A big topic is climate change, especially in light of the recent international report predicting some catastrophic impact in the coming decades. One of our readers is Sally Malanga of West Orange, and she's a voter also in this district, a businesswoman or owner of a business who was really concerned about coming scarcity of agricultural and food products that she relies upon. She says candidates aren't talking about climate change despite its urgency. And her question tonight is, would the candidates immediately support a carbon tax and dividend on fossil fuels? It's a prominent proposal that has recently gained bipartisan support. And if not, why?
All right, you each get 60 seconds for this question, starting with Assemblyman Mr. Weber.
Well, thank you, Michael. When we talk about the environment and the protection of the environment and what we leave to our children, it is an obligation that everyone that goes to Washington needs to take seriously. And of course I will. And I have. Serving in the State Assembly, I have been able to balance the needs of our environment with the opportunity we have to have for a growing and thriving economy that will support our population. I've done things like vote against drilling off our coast to stop pipelines coming in to New Jersey so that we don't have end runs around those drilling pipelines, and to support cost-efficient things like wind energy when they make sense. If someone shows me a plan that will address climate change, that is fair to the American taxpayer, that treats all nations equally, and that puts everyone with skin in the game, I will consider that. So far, we haven't seen it, and I'd be very reluctant to tie America's hands behind its back when China and India and others won't do the same.
Ms. Sherrill, 60 seconds.
So I'm very proud of New Jersey. Because as you've heard from Assemblyman Weber and you'll hear from me, there's broad agreement that climate change is real and that it needs to be addressed. We even saw Governor Christine Todd Whitman break with the party in Washington because she doesn't think that they are supporting the needs of the environment as well as they should be. And so here in New Jersey, we know the needs for real investment in protecting New Jersey and moving forward in a way that is going to be less harmful for our environment. We have opportunities, though, and that's the good news. We have the best offshore wind conditions in the world here. So we should be looking at new technologies in wind and leading the way because the cost of wind power technology is going down every single year. We have over 600 jobs in solar in the 11th District alone. We need to build upon that. Those are also, by the way, great jobs for vets. So I'm very invested in that. We have so many economic opportunities, so moving forward on a green power economy is not just helpful for our environment here in New Jersey, but helpful for our economy.
So the question asked directly, would you support a carbon tax? Mr. Weber implied he would not because it would choke the economy. How about you?
I would want to look at that more carefully and see if that's the way we want to move forward here. My focus has been on ways we can move forward in our economy here in New Jersey towards a green economy.
All right. Let's talk about the Gateway Tunnel project. Our senior correspondent, Brenda Flanagan, explains what's at stake here.
About 450 trains per day, 200,000 passenger trips take the current two-track tunnel under the Hudson. A battering from Superstorm Sandy only upped the ante, pushing the crumbling tunnel into critical condition. Service often stops for emergency repairs.
You have an aging tunnel, 100 years plus, so it isn't getting better. It isn't healing itself.
If even one track fails, forcing all traffic to use the single remaining rail, the number of trains per hour through that tunnel drops from 24 to 6. The $13 billion Gateway Tunnel project would replace the old structure, and it originally received promises of 50% federal funding from the Obama administration. But Donald Trump, after an apparent political feud with New York Senator Chuck Schumer, threatened to block all Gateway funding.
I do not understand why anybody, for political reasons, would want to do a serious self-inflicted wound.
The Port Authority agreed with New York and New Jersey to earmark $5.5 billion for the tunnel. It's repetitioned the federal government to upgrade the project's funding priority.
Okay, this question goes to Mr. Weber. You've said on Gateway, quote, "No candidate in this field will be better positioned to negotiate with the Trump administration to get this done than I." What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is a couple things, Michael. First of all, I started my family in Chatham. My wife took that train into the city every day, sometimes pregnant, with our oldest daughter, Annie. I know what it is to have that commute, and I've watched that commute, and it's a high priority. So I'm going to prioritize it. We have to build that Gateway Tunnel. It's quite obvious that someone in the minority in Washington from the minority party, a Democrat opposite President Trump's party, will not have the ability to walk in to the White House and say, this is a project that's important to my district, Mr. President. We need to fund it. I will be a leader in Washington to pull together the Port Authority, New York, New Jersey, the White House, and the private sector, if we have to make sure that tunnel gets built.
Ms. Sherrill, a 30-second rebuttal.
Well, might I express some empathy for your wife, because I have done that commute pregnant, and it is no fun. But I will tell you, it's getting less fun, because my husband still does it. And we see derailments, we see train cancellations, we know that there's switching problems. We have got to get the critical infrastructure funding. And quite frankly, if we couldn't see that with the Chairman of Appropriations, Representative Frelinghuysen, in our delegation, then I think what we need to do is have new leadership in Congress, and new leaders who can fight hard to get that funded.
Let me follow up on that. Rodney Frelinghuysen, who sits in the 11th Congressional District seat as we speak, is the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee. If he can't get it done, how can you?
Listen, I'm going to talk to the president, and I'm going to ask him to get this done for our district. It's important. It needs to get done. It's a regional priority, and he's already expressed his support for my candidacy, wants to work with me, and I will take that, go to the White House and say, if you want to work with us, Mr. President, you have to treat New Jersey well. This is a top priority for our district.
Ms. Sherrill, you've said that you want to practice bipartisanship and reach across the aisle when possible to solve problems. Would you reach across the aisle and support funding for a border wall if it meant getting the funding for Gateway?
Wow. Since Gateway Tunnel is my most important, one of the most important issues in this campaign, I would have to look at that decision and that deal. I think the problem, though, is that even the southern state and border states have said that the border wall won't be helpful. That won't stop the problem of illegal immigration. We need more drones on the border. We do need more funding for security. But the wall is actually a huge waste of money. So looking at how we could get the Gateway Tunnel funded is critical, and I would look at the possibilities that come here. But people in the district tell me all the time, they say, you know what, Mikie, we don't need a wall between the United States and Mexico. We need a tunnel into Manhattan. And that's where I think the focus in Washington should be.
What's your position on the border wall?
We should secure that border first and foremost.
With a wall?
Whether it's with physical security, with additional troops, with drones, with electronic means. The people of this country have lost confidence in the federal government to control its borders. And securing the border first is a prerequisite, I think, to any common sense immigration reform. Once we do that, then we can get to these thorny issues about fixing it for the dreamers or reducing luck and prioritizing merit for people who come in. This is a big difference between me and Mikie Sherrill on this. I've been very clear about my positions on immigration. Mikie's run with people who want sanctuary cities and sanctuary states, like Phil Murphy, like Nancy Pelosi. Mikie runs with people who want open borders and wants to abolish ICE. Doesn't say anything about the issue unless she's pressed in a debate forum like this. And so I'm very clear about prioritizing border security, reforming our immigration system, and restoring that important sense of American citizenship that means so much and should be a beacon to the world of freedom instead of being devalued and debased by the people that Mikie Sherrill runs around with.
Let's talk about ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Unit of the federal government. Ms. Sherrill, you spoke at an immigration rally in Morristown this spring, at which, according to your account, several people held signs saying, "Abolish ICE." Your opponent says you organized a rally, one of whose goals was to abolish ICE. What is your position on abolishing ICE?
Well, I don't want to abolish ICE. I've never wanted to abolish ICE. I attended a rally that was to discuss border separations, and some people showed up with some signs. And then when Assemblyman Weber tried to deceive the voters in the district and say that I supported abolishing ICE, he was called a flat-out liar by the Star-Ledger, because it's simply not true. There's no evidence I've ever said that. I've never said that. If you, as I've said, want to know the people that I run with, they are federal agents. They are federal prosecutors. They are Navy veterans. And if we want to talk about people that you run with, we could talk about people that Assemblyman Weber runs with, who were architects of the SALT cap, people who want to take away our health insurance, people who don't want to fund the tunnel that we need, the Gateway Tunnel. But I don't generally talk about that because I'm focused on the issues of New Jersey, and I'm focused on the 11th District of New Jersey.
Mr. Weber, do you still say that she organized a rally calling for the abolition of ICE?
Mikie promoted a rally at which somebody spoke and said, we should abolish ICE and we should have open borders. I called on Mikie 3 times to denounce those comments, to make clear her position, and she stayed silent. The reasonable inference, it is true. The reasonable inference was she agreed with everything that was said at the rally. Not until, Michael, the press conference that you covered, where I was going to criticize her very publicly, the hour before that, she issued a press statement saying, I actually don't support the abolishment of ICE because I put my finger in the wind now, and I realized that's a really bad political position for me. That's the truth of it. And if she says now she doesn't support the abolishment of ICE, she's certainly running with people who do all the time at rallies, or people who support sanctuary cities like Phil Murphy.
You want to respond?
I do. I think time and again, Assemblyman Weber has attempted to deceive the voters here in New Jersey. He has said numerous times that I support Nancy Pelosi. I don't support Nancy Pelosi. I put out a commercial saying that I don't support Nancy Pelosi. He said that I support abolishing ICE, which I have never said, and then, as I mentioned, was called a flat-out liar by the Star-Ledger. He said that I want to cut Social Security and Medicaid. I have never once said that I want to cut Social Security and Medicaid. I think what we need to focus on are the real issues of this district. And unfortunately, Assemblyman Weber doesn't share the values of the district, and he's not concerned about the issues of this district.
We may get to that. Ms. Sherrill, your bio says that during your military service, you worked on Russia policy and relations between the U.S. and Russian navies. Do you agree with President Trump that good relations with Russia are preferable to treating it like an enemy?
I certainly think good relations with Russia are preferable, but right now we don't have a good relationship with Russia. They tried to hack into the heart of our democracy in our election system. They are trying to take advantage of us. They are not promoting our agenda in Syria, certainly, and they have not been a good partner to us in any sense of the word. So why we are now treating our enemies better than our traditional allies is beyond me. We need to have stronger relationships with NATO. We need to have stronger relationships with the people that support our agenda across this world, and Russia is not one of those states.
Mr. Weber, a 30-second rebuttal.
We need to be very clear about who our rivals are in this world and who our friends are. Russia is a rival and needs to be treated as such. We'd prefer to be friends, but we have to deal with them with strength. North Korea is a rival. We need to deal with them with strength. We'd prefer peace. We're working towards peace, but we need to deal with them as a rival. When we have friends like Israel, we need to support Israel. And I think the Trump administration has done a wonderful job moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, standing up to the Syrians, tearing up the Iranian deal. These are things that we have to do to show our friends that we are their friends and our rivals that we mean business.
Let's stay on foreign policy and ask you each, starting with Mr. Weber, Which country represents the greatest threat to the United States?
I think increasingly it's China. North Korea, of course, is totally unpredictable and has nuclear weapons. That's a problem. But China is an emerging world power that is seeking military expansion in the South China Sea, but even more problematic, an economic rise or dominance that threatens our economy. And so I think the president is right to deal with China in a very firm and confrontational way. Again, we should and could have excellent relations with a trading partner that has so much promise for both countries. But an increasingly expansionist China and a China that's increasingly interested in espionage, stealing our technology, unfair trade deals, that's a country that we have to, I think, focus on, even as we keep our eye on the Middle East and Iran and terrorist organizations, certainly Russia with all its nuclear weapons. I think China might be first among equals in terms of rivals around the world.
Ms. Sherrill, your thought on the country that poses the greatest threat to the country, our country?
Well, it's hard to pick just one right now. We have seen some of the national security issues that are more dangerous than really any time in the last several decades. We have an increasingly expansionist Russia. We've seen what they're doing in Syria, the threats they're making there. We see the increasing threat of Iran in the Middle East as well, not just in Syria, but incursions into the Gaza Strip. We've seen them in Qatar and in Yemen. We do see China. They have long been committing espionage against the United States, but their cyber espionage is growing in, they're getting better and better at it. Certainly the cyber espionage of Russia has been proven to be very dangerous, and we've seen that in our own elections. So that's why I think it's so important that we look to having a fully staffed State Department, that we look to our traditional allies, the NATO countries and Israel, to help us promote our goals across the world and our safety across the world.
So you don't want to pick one country?
I can't pick one.
All right. Staying in the same area, this question is for both of you, starting with Mr. Weber. Under President Trump, military spending has increased significantly to almost $700 billion for fiscal year 2019. Are we spending too much on the military, or has Trump found the right balance?
I think he's made great strides, Michael, giving our soldiers and sailors a much-needed raise for the first time in years, rewarding their heroism and effort. I applaud that. We have to have a strong military. Mikie referenced, we have a lot of rivals and a lot of interests around the world. Not only do we need diplomacy, but we need military strength to back up our diplomacy. And as a world power, as a leading world power, we have to be able to project our influence to every corner of the globe. And so whether it's by land or air or increasingly space, the U.S. has an obligation to maintain a strong military within a balanced budget that protects our interests and promotes peace and democracy across the world.
Ms. Sherrill, do we have the right balance?
I'm not concerned as much about the spending as where the money is being spent. Right now, we have underspent in cybersecurity for several years now. We need to move forward in cybersecurity, which is one of the goals of the Defense Department. I think we also have looked at some of the rotations of our personnel on ships, and we're looking at the different rotations and how we could do that better. I'm happy to see that some of the deployments had gone on for far too long for especially our sailors. And we need to put that money into R&D. We need to make sure that we are always at the cutting edge, especially when we see more and more money going into the Russian military, the Chinese military. So we need to put money into R&D, which isn't just for our defense, but also helps us develop the new technologies of tomorrow, including, as Assemblyman Weber, in some of the areas of space, when we're moving into satellite technology and some of that rocket technology.
All right, we're going to move on. This question is for both of you, starting with Mr. Weber. We have a national problem around race. In the area of policing alone, we see striking imbalances in terms of marijuana arrests, traffic stops, incarcerations, and police shootings. What are some of the reasons for this, and what do you propose to do legislatively to address it?
Well, Michael, I'm no sociologist to tell you what underlies all those statistics. Here's what I know. In this country, the color of your skin shouldn't matter. And we need to have a government and policies that encourage us to be race blind, treat everybody equally, instead of constantly dividing people on the basis of their race or their ethnicity. The best thing I think we can do, and the best social program we have in America, is a job. And so when we see record low African-American unemployment, record low Hispanic unemployment, due to the leadership of this president, due to the leadership of Congress in cutting taxes, that helps a lot of problems in this country, Michael. It solves a lot of social ills, and that's what our goal should be. A race-blind society that's prosperous and provides opportunity for all.
Let me quickly follow up. You've accused Ms. Sherrill in the past of engaging in identity politics, and I think you just alluded to it without out and out saying it. What does that mean, identity politics?
It means talking to people as if their interests are based on their ethnicity. Mikie did a press conference in Morristown talking about Hispanic-owned businesses and criticized me for voting against set-asides for Hispanic-owned businesses. Well, what about Indian-owned businesses? What about Chinese-owned businesses? They're important too, and I don't see why we should.
You voted against those too.
I vote against all set-asides because everybody should be treated equally. Everybody should be treated equally, and if you want to divide this country based on ethnicity and then play it up in a campaign, I think that demeans our politics and separates our society. I'm interested in uniting us, Michael, not dividing us. And Michael's running a divisive campaign.
Let me get your response to that and then your thought on the racial issues.
Certainly. I wish we lived in a post-racial society, but we don't. I wish we lived in a society that valued women as much as men in the workplace, but we don't. Women only make 82 cents on every dollar. That's why I was proud to see the Assembly and the Senate recently pass and Governor Murphy signed into law an equal pay bill, which Assemblyman Weber was one of only 2 people in the entire legislature to vote against. These are real concerns and real issues, and how we handle them is complex because some of the ways we've handled it in the past have not led to the kind of prosperity that we want it to lead to. But as far as looking at how we move forward, the problems between the over-incarceration of black and brown men, the problems of the, how people are treated with marijuana crimes, cocaine versus crack cocaine. We need comprehensive criminal justice reform. And it's part of the reason I'm running. Part of the reason that I feel so deeply that the legislative branch of our government is not functioning in the way we need it to function. The Koch brothers and the ACLU agree on the criminal justice bill that we have to get through Congress. It has wide bipartisan support, and yet it hasn't passed. We have got to start to address these real concerns. We have to look at the federal sentencing guidelines, which, as I alluded to, have disparities between crack and powder cocaine. We need to look at how we are treating people in prison. We need to look at, here in New Jersey, we actually have some very good progressive criminal justice legislation on the books, and yet the disparities between black and brown men and white men in our prisons are some of the highest in the nation. These are all the things that we have to take a look at.
Got to stop you there, but you raised the equal pay issue, and I want to pursue that. Mr. Weber, in April, the Assembly passed an equal pay for equal work bill. You were one of only 2 no votes. The vote was 74-2. Your opponent has seized on that as suggesting that you are anti-woman. Why did you oppose that measure?
Well, Michael, it wasn't an equal pay for equal work bill. I wish you would have characterized it better because I think you understand the law better. We had equal pay for equal work in the state, and we've had it for decades. The bill that we voted on was redundant and, frankly, is something that the New Jersey Law Journal said was a bad bill. I'm committed to equal pay for equal work. It's what I do for a living, defend women in the workplace when they're discriminated against in matters of pay or sexually harassed or other things. Here's the problem. Mikie Sherrill knows this. You're an attorney, Mikie, and you know that equal pay for equal work was the law of the land before we ever voted on this bill. The bill will crush small employers with punitive damages going back years in their statute of limitations. It is bad for business. It is wrong for New Jersey. We should have what we had before April, which was equal pay for equal work, the same position that Barack Obama took and that I supported.
The New Jersey Law Journal editorialized against the equal pay bill, saying it was harmful to business, as Mr. Weber says. what do you think of his argument that we already had an equal pay law? We didn't need a new one.
Well, 74 members of the Senate and Assembly thought we did, because they know, like I know, that women are only making 82 cents for every dollar here in New Jersey. And that's not good for business when people are treated unequally. We do need better legislation on this. And not only does, as far as I do claim that Assemblyman Weber does not support women, because not only does he not support equal pay, he doesn't support Planned Parenthood. He was one of the people under Chris Christie that made us the first state in the nation to defund Planned Parenthood. And when that happened, we saw the rates of breast cancer screenings go down. We saw the rates of STDs go up. These are the things that aren't the values of this district and aren't the values that we here in this district share.
Interesting that you should bring up values, because that's our next question. But a quick response on the anti-choice position.
It's just the presumptuousness of Mikie to think that she presumes to speak for all women in this district. My wife told me before I went to go vote on that bill in April, she said, you better vote against that because it's the right thing to do. Don't get cowed by political pressure. Don't get blown with the wind. Don't go with the crowd. Do the right thing. And to suggest that a father of 4 beautiful daughters and the husband of a Harvard Law trained wife is somehow anti-woman is frankly offensive.
All right, let's leave that there and go to this question for Mr. Weber. Your campaign has said, quote, Mikie Sherrill is wildly out of touch with North Jersey values. What are North Jersey values?
North Jersey values are fiscally conservative. North Jersey values want our laws enforced at the border and want a fair deal for the kids who are here illegally through no fault of their own. New Jersey values reject senators like Bob Menendez, who were caught taking $1 million in illegal gifts. They don't vote for them, Mikie. New Jersey values are not supporting Nancy Pelosi. And Mikie might say and might spend a lot of money saying, I'm not going to vote for her for Speaker. Michael, you've seen the quote. Mikie Sherrill thinks that Nancy Pelosi was the most effective Speaker that we've seen in the last several decades. And she applauds the legislation she was able to pass. I don't care if your name is Nancy Pelosi or Joe Smith. If that's the kind of Speaker you want in Washington, you don't represent North Jersey values.
You've called him representative of Arkansas values because Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas has been here once or twice on his behalf. And you've called her
Montclair Mikie.
You've called her Montclair Mikie, and you've also said she personifies San Francisco values because she said nice things about Nancy Pelosi. You want to repeat those allegations or withdraw them tonight? Arkansas values over here?
So, as a person from a state that only gets 74 cents back on every dollar, and as a person from a state that was worse hit by this tax bill than any state in the nation, I'm not surprised that Senator Cotton endorsed Assemblyman Weber, because he supports things that are probably really good for the state of Arkansas. They're just really bad for New Jersey. And I would say it seems like, from hearing Assemblyman Weber tell it, New Jersey values involve deceiving the voters, because I've already expressed this litany of charges that he levies against me that he's been called out on several times as being untruthful about. And yet, I think when we talk about North Jersey values, we talk about growing our economy for everyone. We talk about making sure that people are invested in. We talk about investing in our future and making sure that we lower taxes on families while at the same time investing in infrastructure so we can meet the critical needs of this district and grow the jobs for the future so that our kids stay here and can get good jobs here.
All right, this question is for both of you, starting with Mr. Weber. In an age of misinformation and disinformation, would you support the federal government stepping in to regulate social networks like Facebook and Twitter?
I think we have to be very, very careful about that, Michael. For as frustrating as it is to watch Facebook, Twitter, Google suppress opinions and thought, and very often opinions and thought on the right, I'd be most concerned about government trying to take a leading role in telling private entities what they can and can't say or how they should run their operations. I think transparency is a laudable goal. I have no problem with Congress calling the leaders of Facebook and Google and Twitter to Congress to testify, to explain their algorithms or to explain why they're making the decisions they're making. I think the public has an interest in that, but I'd be very, very careful before we got the state involved with determining what speech is acceptable and what decisions people are making around what our core First Amendment rights.
Ms. Sherrill, your thought.
Well, I believe in net neutrality, and I'm opposed to any attacks on net neutrality. But I agree, we really need to make sure we have transparency. I think one of the key things is understanding where information is coming from on the internet. So when we see trolls from Russia or China who's getting increasingly active in this area, and people don't realize that that's who's feeding them the information. We need to have transparency there so that we can so people can choose where they're going to get their information and understand who's putting that information out. I think we've seen some very dangerous things in people attacking our democracy in the last election cycle. And people need to be aware that that's happening and need to understand how they're getting their news and where their news is coming from.
Federal regulation, yes, no?
I'd be very cautious with the federal regulation.
All right, this is our final question. It goes to Ms. Sherrill. President Trump tweeted of your opponent, quote, "He is outstanding in every way, strong on borders, loves our military and our vets, big crime fighter. Jay has my full and total endorsement." What would you say in reply to Trump's tweet?
I would say that I hope that if he's excited about the 11th District of New Jersey, he gets some infrastructure spending here, that he makes sure that we get quality and affordable health care for everyone in this country, that we have a tax plan that invests in all states, not just a chosen few, and that we work hard to move this country forward.
Mr. Weber, your comment on the Trump tweet, you were surprised by it, I read.
Yeah, no one tells you from the White House, hey, something's coming. So it shows up on Twitter and you say, wow, thank you, Mr. President. Anytime if the leader of the free world wants to get involved in my congressional race and help me bring my vision of a more prosperous, freer, stronger America to the voters of my district, I welcome it. I welcome the juxtaposition between Donald Trump's America, which is working and which is freer and more prosperous than it has been in decades, and the Nancy Pelosi agenda that Mikie supports, that she lauds and that she thinks Nancy Pelosi is an effective speaker. I think that's a great comparison. It's all the voters in this district need to know, and I think we'll be successful based on that. All right, it's time for your closing statements. We begin with you, Mr. Weber. Well, thank you, Mikie. Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Mikie, for your time. I want to ask the voters of the 11th Congressional District to think hard about where their vote will be cast come November 6th. I'm a son of North Jersey. I was born here. I was raised here. I'm raising my family here. I started a business here. I understand the needs of this district, whether it's flooding in the Passaic River Basin or the important priority that Picatinny Arsenal is to our North Jersey economy. I'm committed to providing the same opportunities that North Jersey gave me as a young man, and that North Jersey continues to give me and my family as they grow. The distinction in this campaign is quite simple. I am a forward-looking, optimistic, confident, hopeful candidate who wants to continue to have this economy grow and create opportunity for all. Mikie Sherrill is looking backwards, trying to dredge up old social issues to divide us with that identity politics that Michael had talked about, looking to stoke controversy instead of address those issues at the kitchen table that everyone wants addressed. And so on November 6th, or if you're voting by mail, vote now. I'd like to ask for your vote to keep America moving forward and to keep us prosperous and free. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Weber. Ms. Sherrill, your closing statement.
Thank you. And thank you, NJTV, for having us here tonight. Thank you, Assemblyman Weber, for taking part in this debate. I began my service to this country when I was 18 years old and joined the Naval Academy. I went on to serve for almost 10 years in the United States Navy as a helicopter pilot and finally as a Russian policy officer. I served again here in New Jersey at the U.S. Attorney's Office. After a lifetime of service, I decided the best way I could continue my service to my country and to New Jersey was to run for Congress. Because I'm not just concerned about what's happening now. I'm concerned about the future of New Jersey because I have 4 kids. And so I think we need to work in a bipartisan manner to get good legislation passed in Congress. A tax plan that doesn't attack New Jersey, quality and affordable health care for everyone in this country, working hard to bring costs down in our health care system, infrastructure spending so we can grow our economy now and well into the future. I have always put this country first. I have worked with people from across the country and even across the world to get the mission accomplished. And quite frankly, Jay Weber hasn't. So I'm asking you for your vote, and thank you so much.
All right, that's it. I want to thank you both, Mikie Sherrill, Jay Weber. Good luck to you both in the election. It's been a good and broad-ranging debate. Now let's hear a little more about it. I'm going to go back to my colleagues on the news desk.
Thank you, Michael Aaron. Well, you've heard it. Democrat Mikie Sherrill, Republican Jay Weber, battling back and forth, by my count, at least 16 major issues as they run for the 11th Congressional District. I'm going to go to Patrick Murray, your pollster first. Of all those issues, which are the ones that, in your experience, are bubbling to the top and really resonating with voters?
The one issue on which persuadable voters, the few persuadable voters that we have left, are still kind of tentative is health care. And we heard them talk about health care today. What they're worried about is having the rug pulled out from under these voters. That's why they wanted to hear things about pre-existing conditions and so forth. Their concern is that they saw what happened when the Republicans tried to repeal Obamacare, and they were worried about the chaos that would ensue from that. And that's why they are trending right now towards the Democrats, and I think that's helping Sherrill in this race right now. What Jay Weber needs to do, and what he tried to do tonight, certainly, is to win them back by, calming them down and saying, no, we're going to, all those key things, we're going to, whatever we do with healthcare, we're still going to try to protect them.
Any new ground, Patrick, as far as you can tell, they broke tonight?
No new ground, I think.
Midterm elections are just 27 days away, and tomorrow night we bring you another congressional campaign debate. At 8 Eastern, we're live from Johnstown, Iowa for the